Today is the third episode in our exercise series, and we're talking all about stretching and mobility. Let's go. Hi, I'm Jessica Valant, a physical therapist and Pilates teacher, and I want to bring science-based knowledge, empathy, courage, support, love, and hopefully some fun to the journeys we have with our bodies. There is hope and strength in your body, and my goal is to help you find it. Welcome back to Meet Your Body. So today is the third episode in our exercise series. So if you want to go back after this and listen to episodes 1 and 2, we talked about Pilates in the first episode. And then in our second episode of the series, we talked all about resistance training and weights and bands and how to use those in your own fitness routine. So today I want to touch on stretching, flexibility, and mobility, and what those mean, the differences between them, whether you need them, who can benefit, and how to use them in your own weekly routines. So basically, when we say stretching, people have a couple different reactions, and I talk to a lot of people who have a really deep visceral reaction to that idea of stretching. And that reaction is, ugh, I know I need to do it, and it hurts, or I know I need to do it and I don't want to. I get eye rolls and all of that. And I don't know where that kind of idea and paradigm around stretching came from. I think it's from this idea of, even goes back to a lot of us in childhood, from those athletic tests we had to take in gym class. Do you remember those? Like the toe touch, those forward touches where you had to touch your toes or maybe reach farther. I think that did a lot of us in thinking, oh, I can't do that. I'm tight. And then we didn't get high scores, so we just assumed that we weren't very flexible and bendy, and we never wanted to do it again. So I really want to talk about why this concept is important in our lives, but also I really want to get rid of some of the myths out there that you need to be stretching and touching your toes every day, because that just simply isn't true. So to dive deeper into that, though, we need to talk about the true definition and difference between these terms of stretching, flexibility, and mobility. So flexibility itself, the definition of flexibility, is the quality of bending easily without breaking. So flexibility is kind of that quality that we have in mind. And then stretching would be one of the ways that we think we need to do to get more flexibility, to get there. And then mobility would be another kind of type of movement. So if you think of stretching as a type of movement, mobility is another type of movement. Okay, so those are the two types of movements: stretching and mobility. Stretching exercises, mobility exercises. Those are the things we're going to talk about today. And then the end goal that people have had in mind for all of these years, the end goal we typically have in mind is the idea of flexibility. So that quality of bending easily without breaking. But another important concept that we have kind of left behind in the previous years talking all about this is that piece of without breaking, okay? Quality of bending easily without breaking. There is a strength component that actually needs to be included when we talk about true flexibility, and that's where mobility comes in. So let me talk about the difference between stretching exercises and mobility exercises so we can kind of start to have a better understanding of these things. So stretching itself is the act of increasing your flexibility. So typically this is done passively. So you can again think of just touching your toes or putting your foot up on that fence before you go for a run, or up on a counter and bending forward to try to increase your hamstring stretch. Or you can think of a runner's lunge where you try to work on your hip flexor flexibility. Typically you would go into that position and you would hold it for a long period of time and you just hang out there, right? That is a passive stretch. You're just holding it. You're not doing anything except maybe hoping that it was over. We use passive stretching in physical therapy a lot. It's called passive range of motion. If I have a client come in who has had rotator cuff surgery, they're not allowed to move their own joint, their own arm for a certain amount of time. But I, as a physical therapist, am able to move it for them because we're not ready to make the muscles work. They're not allowed to use their muscles yet. But we need to start increasing the range of motion of the joint, okay? So that would be passively stretching. I am moving their arm for them without them being able to use the muscles whatsoever. So you can think of that in a very passive way, okay? It might be an important step, but you probably can already understand that that can't be our end goal. I can't stretch that person's arm passively for them and then say, okay, you're good to go. Bye. Good luck with your rehab. I think you're all ready to go. Because just because they have that range of motion doesn't mean they have the strength in the range of motion. That is mobility. Mobility is how a joint moves through its range of motion, which is flexibility and strength, okay? It's both. So someone might be very passively flexible. Again, you can think of that idea of me moving their arm, and I've worked out all the scar tissue. I've gotten the muscles moving again. All of that is good. I can move their arm in full range of motion. But if they don't have any strength in that range of motion, they're not going to be functional. They're going to be prone to injury. A lot of things can happen. So if you go back to that example of moving without breaking, they might be able to move easily, but they're not necessarily safe from that breaking component. This is why that flexibility idea or that movement, range of motion idea is important with the strength. And that's why it's so wonderful that these mobility exercises are really starting to get a little more traction, and you'll hear me talk about them a lot today. So mobility takes that idea of your passive stretching that you've probably done throughout life, which I'm not going to throw out, okay? We're going to talk about why they both might be important. But mobility takes it to a place of function, moving that joint through its range of motion and being strong there. Mobility is what you need in your hips to get on and off the floor. Mobility is what you need in your shoulders to be able to reach in the back of your car and grab a bag or grab your purse. Mobility allows you to move and be strong in that range. And again, I think both can be used. Sometimes flexibility is a really nice place to start. There's something to be said for flexibility and like just simple stretching exercises to help calm our nervous system. I personally use them. I have a little hip routine I do at night that helps me a lot with the scar tissue that I have within my hips from my surgeries and my endometriosis. Those stretching exercises are the base of what really can help my range of motion. And then, okay, it's not a but, it's not a or, it's an and. In addition to that, what I have realized over the past few years is that I continued to have that hip pain and I wasn't able to be strong in my hips in certain ranges of motion. So for example, on and off the floor or in a deep squat. I didn't have the strength to come up out of the position. I could get into it because I had that flexibility. I could get into a deep squat, but I couldn't get out of it because I didn't have the strength needed in that range of motion. So in the past few years, I've worked very specifically and intentionally to start to gain mobility and work mobility exercises in my hips. And I personally have found that addition has added another layer of protection to my hips. I'm having less hip flexor pain. I'm having less SI pain because I have been doing both. So there can definitely be a way to include both, and both can be beneficial. But I really want to continue to point out that it's the mobility exercises that are going to help you be strong within that joint range of motion. So to help you kind of finalize that visualization of what this might look like, let's go back to that runner's lunge stretch where we're stretching out the hip flexors or the psoas because many of us can get tight there. So first thing to know is there can be many, many, many different reasons that we are tight in a muscle. And sometimes it's not because that muscle is truly shortened in and of itself. It can be because other things are weak. So that muscle is tightening up to try to protect you, or it's guarding. It can be different reasons. For me, again, it kind of has to do with a lot of scar tissue that I have. So if you rely only on that passive stretch, you're not getting to the root sometimes of the problem as to why that muscle is tight. So it might help short term. It definitely can be a part of the puzzle, but you want to look at a lot of different aspects as to why that muscle is tightening up. But that passive stretch would be that kind of runner's lunge stretch that you're stretching out your hip flexor. If we take that hip flexor and then put it into more of a mobility paradigm, it's going to look like getting you into a deeper squat, possibly where that hip flexor is in its full range of motion, or your hip itself is in a full range of motion, and working on strength in that position. It could look like things like doing something called windshield wipers, where you are sitting and you let one knee fall out to the side and then the other side, and you work on control in that rotation place. It can look like different aspects, but it's going to be getting you into different ranges of motion, working on some strength and control, and it typically is done with movement. So you are moving while you're doing that, as opposed to simply just holding still. And the best example I like to use when I'm explaining to my clients why this matters and why it helps is picturing kneading dough. If you've ever kneaded dough before. So I make homemade pizza dough quite a bit for my kids and my family. When you first start out with dough, like you're just finished mixing the flour in with the water and the yeast, and you start to knead it, it is just sticky. It's like a sticky mound. And you think, this is never going to get pliable. Every single time I do this, I think, I did not do the right amount of flour. I didn't do the right amount of water. This doesn't look right. But I trust the process. I fold it, rotate the bowl, fold it, rotate the bowl, push, rotate the bowl. I do that. We have to do that for 3 to 5 minutes. And I just keep going and I keep going and I pull and I rotate and I knead and I push. And over time, it starts to get pliable. It starts to come together. It starts to change into this lovely dough shape. That is what happens with our muscles. We can't just, like with dough, I can't just fold it once, call it good and set it to the side. It needs some loving. It needs some magic and some moving and some zhuzhing around. And that's what our bodies need. We can't just throw our foot up on a counter and bend over and hope that that muscle is going to stretch on its own. It needs some loving. There's so many different fibers and so many different things pulling on the muscles, and you have joint issues and you have tendons and you have ligaments, and then you have different angles of the fibers. So you have to move to the left and move to the right. And that's what I want you to think about. Think about that dough. That's what our bodies need when we're trying to increase our flexibility and increase our mobility. It takes time, it takes consistency, it takes trusting the process, and it takes that consideration with movement and with moving and with trusting your body. All right, so let's go through some myths of stretching and mobility. The first one I really want to get into is the idea that bendy is better. We really have this idea, and I think it comes from aesthetically looking at bendy bodies. They can make beautiful positions, right? Your dancers and your gymnasts and your yogi experts making these beautiful shapes with their bodies, who are very bendy. So that is a lot of flexibility. The problem is there typically isn't strength in those positions. Occasionally there are. Okay, so I'm not putting an umbrella statement on this, but most people who are very, very bendy or even hypermobile are going to tell you that they have a slew of other pains and problems and issues because of that flexibility. So you really do need strength with it. Gymnasts are a great example, one of the strongest athletes out there. So definitely so much strength in a competitive gymnast. Also, when you watch them, especially do that last pose, when they turn to the judges and do that last pose, that back bend, you can see exactly where they bend in their back. Like it tends to be one spot that bends. That is typically a hypermobile spot, a spot that is moving way too much right there. So there could be strength in a lot of different areas in your body. And still, if you have one spot that's always moving too much without control and strength in that spot, you can get pain and issues and problems in that one spot. It's just that idea of trying to have a balance of flexibility and strength. So if you are hypermobile, if you actually have a diagnosis of hypermobility, we are going to work on taking you out of that huge range of motion, right? If you have so much flexibility that you can't control it and you're having joint pain, we actually, as clinicians, we're going to bring you in and try to control it in a smaller range of motion and strengthen you in that smaller range of motion. So whereas most people do need some kind of mobility and stretching exercises in their lives, I don't want you to compare yourselves to the people who are really, really bendy and think, oh, that's what I want. I really find as a physical therapist and working with clients, people tend to look even at their spouse and they'll say, oh, she can touch her toes. She's so much better than me. We have this idea that flexibility means better or means healthier. And it could. That person with increased flexibility might be healthier than you, but it's not necessarily because of the flexibility. So take that out of it. Each body is different. We are all born differently, and some people are born much more bendy. Some people are born more stiff. So in the bendy bodies, we're going to work on strengthening. In those stiff bodies, we're going to work a little more on the stretching and mobility. So again, think of it as we all need it in some aspect. It's going to look a little different for all of us. So we need to understand what our needs are, what our bodies need, how we react, how we can incorporate it into our own routines. But don't always think that the most bendy bodies out there are going to be better or healthier. We are all different and we all have some great pros about our bodies. We all have some things that we need to work on for injuries and pain and those kind of things. So you're going to find what's right for you without comparing yourself to other people. Another myth is that idea that we touched on earlier that simple stretching can cause long-term changes in muscle length. Typically from research, we know that is not true, that you're holding of a hamstring stretch for 30 seconds a couple times a day. That's not going to cause long-term changes in muscle length. So I like to touch on that so that you understand it's really, again, like we talked about, more of that concept of kneading the dough, that it's going to incorporate different things like mobility, like some strengthening where you're weak, like constant movement and working on it. And also know that just because it doesn't cause a long-term change in the muscle length, it doesn't mean it might not have a benefit to you. Like I mentioned, I have a hip stretch routine I do at night that's going to be typically stretching exercises where I hold it sometimes for 3, 4, or 5 minutes actually at a time. While my husband's reading my daughter a bedtime book, I sit in there with them and I'll do my stretches. It can make me feel a lot better. Also, I don't kind of kid myself and think that's all I need. I know I need more than that, but that stretching routine does help calm my nervous system. It helps stretch out my scar tissue, and it helps if I am feeling stiff at that time. Just know that it is not actually causing long-term effects on muscle length. They're going to need to include some other exercises as well. All right, another myth that I hear from people is that they are so strong going to the gym all the time. They do their CrossFit or Peloton all the time, whatever activities they love, right? Whatever activities you love, that's great. But they're so strong, they don't need any kind of flexibility because the strength is what matters. And hopefully I've said enough so far today to convince you that you really do need both. You need that mobility for so many reasons. The biggest one is function. Especially as we age, we want to make sure that we're maintaining our range of motion, maintaining the range of motion of the spine so you're able to bend over as needed. You're able to stand up straight and maintain good posture. Those kind of things are really improved when we work on our mobility. So no matter how strong you are, mobility is a really important aspect of our overall health and fitness. And the last myth that I want to touch on that I hear from people is they'll say, oh, okay, I can touch my toes and that's good enough. And again, I think the hamstrings and the hip flexors just have their big moment of glory, right? We focus mostly on those, and we do get really tight in our hips. No doubt about it. We can get very tight in our hips, hamstrings, hip flexors. And so it's great to work on those. But just bending over to touch your toes doesn't necessarily include how are you in your shoulders, right? How are you in the upper back? How are you moving in those thoracic vertebrae? How are you moving in your ankle, actually? Do you have good ankle range of motion? Because that is key to balance over time and not falling, is ankle range of motion. So touching your toes is wonderful. And also, if you can't do it, it's okay. But just know that that is just one aspect of our entire body. We need to really be staying mobile in all areas. So the benefits of doing these kind of exercises, both stretching and mobility, include healthier joints. So not only are you going to have that full range of motion in the joints, but you're helping to get fluid into the joints when you move them. You're helping with all of the attachments around the joints and the muscles that support the joints. So the joints themselves can be healthier. Improved balance, like we talked about. So you really do need ankle mobility, hip mobility for good gait and good balance. So it helps with your balance, helps with injury prevention. This is a really big one in that what we're trying to do is balance out the body. So you could be very, very strong. We talked about this kind of with the gymnast. You could be very, very strong in some aspects and then have one area that continues to be maybe hypermobile or continues to not have that control. You could be very, very strong, like cyclists and runners, very, very strong in one plane of motion, moving forward. And then the other planes of motion to the side, having that mobility side to side in the hips isn't as great. So think about it as trying to balance out the body, and that's going to help with injury prevention. It also helps with a mind-body connection. And by that, I mean it can help with purposeful movement. As I have improved the amount of mobility exercises that I work on, I'm not saying I'm quite improved in my mobility itself yet, hopefully getting there. But as I've been working on it, I find it takes a lot of concentration, and it's just been so interesting to work my body in a different way and to see where I have some weaknesses I didn't know about, where one side might be weaker than the other. And I will have links below. We're going to talk about how to incorporate this into your own routine. We're going to get there for sure. But I have just found it's a really interesting, neat, different way to move, and it helps that connection for the mobility. And then for the stretching piece, like I said, it's a routine I do almost every night. It helps calm my nervous system. I've done it enough now. It helps with my breath. It again helps connect me to my body. So stretching and mobility can add that piece when sometimes we're just in a go, go, go atmosphere all day. And then the final benefit I want to touch on is improved resilience. Resilience is one of the most important aspects of our body, and resilience really is our ability, our body's ability to react and cope with whatever comes our way. So when I talk about making those investments into your health bank account, like with every workout you do, everything you do just for yourself and your body, you're investing into that health bank account. That is helping to ensure you have resilience when life throws something your way. And mobility is a big way to help with that because, again, you have the strength and the flexibility. You have both. You have that idea of being able to bend without breaking. My example about this actually just happened yesterday. So I was snowboarding. We have made it a goal for our family. My husband grew up here in Colorado. I did not. And he is a great skier. And so we decided we wanted to at least teach our kids how so that they have the option later on. So I have been working to snowboard with them up in the mountains as we teach the kids. I am not good. I've been doing it for a very long time, but very few times over that amount of time. So really yesterday was like my 5th time in 20 years going. And I put a lot of pressure on myself to do better. I was trying to work on a move and I had a very bad fall. Enough that I was laying on my back with tears streaming down my face, wondering how quickly the ambulance could get to me. I really thought something was completely fractured and broken. So I fell right back on my sacrum. So I laid there for a little while and I was able to very shakily get myself back down. So I was able to ride back down very carefully. And I was done for the day, needless to say. And I started to do some assessments on myself to see kind of what was going on. And I mean, I was able to move. It hurt a lot, and it hurts a lot today. And I'm seeing my own PT later today. But I told my husband on the way, driving back home last night from the mountain, I told him, this is a big reason why I do Pilates and mobility and what I do, the things that aren't the big sexy workouts that I would say, right? The things that nobody sees, these little movements that I do every day that I have been working on, the Pilates I've been doing forever. This is why I do it, because I have made, as I age, as I get older, these are the things that are important. Yes, I want to look good. Yes, I want to fit into a certain pair of jeans. That would be great. But I don't have any big aspirations of that happening as I'm 45 and get older, right? Like that's not my number one priority anymore. My number one priority is making these investments into my bank account so that when life throws me a really bad fall yesterday on the ice and on the snow, I have resilience in my body that I bounced back from that. And I am not saying that's the only reason. I know I got super lucky as well. Luck comes into it too. I got lucky that it wasn't worse. It still could get a little bit worse. Today's only day 2, but I am walking around, which laying on the snow yesterday, I did not think I was going to be doing. Resilience is that, and that is what I work on when I add these things. I don't think about how many calories is that going to burn today? Is that going to help make my hips smaller? I don't think about that when I'm doing my mobility exercises. I think, am I going to be able to keep up with my kids when they want me to go hiking? Am I going to be able to continue get on and off the floor? That's what I think about. And am I going to be able to recover from this crazy snowboarding accident? And as of right now, knock on wood, I feel like I am because of the resilience that movement and today, as we're talking, mobility and stretching has given my body. So in each of our series, we've talked about barriers to entry for each thing, for Pilates and then for resistance training. There really aren't many, to be honest, with stretching and mobility, except a couple that I see. One is people tell me it's just too hard, so they don't do it. And that is a big one. If you do feel tight, if you have not worked your flexibility and mobility before, it does feel hard. And I know sometimes it even feels kind of painful. And that can be a big limiting factor. I understand. So I want to acknowledge that. It can be a barrier to entry. I can't give you any solutions to that except to say, one, you can find routines that, again, aren't necessarily putting you into the most painful place. Just because your hamstring's tight doesn't mean we have to start just with hamstring stretching. We're going to start with hip mobility, which you might find feels much different than the traditional hamstring stretches you've done. So you simply have to open up your mind and know there are other options, and then remind yourself this is important. Just letting yourself stay stiff forever isn't putting that investment into your bank account. So you really do have to get past that a little bit and also find ways that don't necessarily hurt all the time. So that's one thing that can hold us back from stretching. And another one is simply the idea of where do I start? Right? Like, what do I start with? There's so many options out there, which I know there are. So we're going to talk through exactly some ways to start, but don't let it overwhelm you. You can start small and build from there, but any kind of mobility and stretching is typically better than none. Okay, so let's talk about how to incorporate it into your own life. I typically see a few different ways to do this. One is, as I've mentioned for myself, I have some specific issues as related to my scar tissue, my endometriosis, my history of surgeries. I have some specific chronic issues in my hip flexors, around to my pelvis and my SI joint that require pretty much daily love. And I can skip some days here and there, but if I stop doing it for a few weeks, I will notice it and feel it. So I have about a 10-minute routine that I have some static stretching and some mobility that I do every night or every other night for about 10 minutes. And I definitely feel better when I do it. So you can use something that way. If you have a very specific issue that you're working on, a tight thoracic spine, some pain. If you've seen me as a physical therapy client and you have knee pain, most likely I've given you some hip mobility and you know you're doing that every day. So that kind of routine, that 5 to 10 minute routine working on something specific can be done every single day. And that has benefits. Think again of that dough. You're kneading the dough consistently. You're going. That's what it takes for changes to come in. So you can use it that way. Also, there are benefits. And again, I'll just use myself as an example. So that's what I would do almost every day. Then, as I said a couple years ago, I made it a goal that I really wanted to incorporate some hip mobility. I started researching specific hip mobility exercises, and I include them twice a week just within another workout. Typically, it's actually on my leg lifting day when I'm doing weights for legs, and then sometimes on my Pilates day, I'll tag it onto the end. That is about, for me, 10 to 20 minutes, and I'm doing it twice a week. So because again, I kind of have a specific goal. It's not related to pain I have or a physical therapy issue. It's just me wanting to improve with it. I'm doing it hip mobility about 10 to 15, maybe 20 minutes a couple times a week as a part of a workout. So you really can use it however you need, but I do encourage you, if you have something specific you're working on, I'll tell you one day a week isn't going to be enough. Not with this. And it's the same with even running or with lifting weights. I would say, yes, it's going to benefit you because you're doing something good for your body that day. But me running once a week, I'm not going to get better at running. Is it a great workout? Sure. Yes, I'm still going to get the benefits from that day, but I'm not going to improve as a runner from running one day a week. Right? It's the same thing with this. Will it give you benefits? Yes. Will you see long-term results? Probably not. You need to commit a little more to it. And what's nice about something like Pilates or my Unlimited program, we have it built in so that it is a regular part of the week. And then in addition, we have the options to do it every day. We have short routines like a 10-minute thoracic mobility routine, a 10-minute hip mobility routine. And I'm going to link those below. So I do have them in Unlimited and we have longer versions, but I also have shorter YouTube versions that are free for everyone. And I'm going to link those below so that you can add those. So if you're wondering, okay, how do I start? I'm not in Unlimited. I just want to know something I can do every day. Check those out. There are some 10-minute routines that you could just include every single day to start to see how it can help, and it can be a part of your other routines. And again, if you are in Unlimited, you can look at even the longer ones. There are some 30-minute versions that you could do once or twice a week if you're looking for those kind of long-term improvements to see what can happen with some specific goals that you have. And finally, it really is like anything else in life. We have to find ways to include it within our own lifestyle and to make it a habit. It's so easy to go to bed every night and be like, shoot, I forgot my stretches. It happens all the time. It happens to all of us. I have found, and especially in the time when I had really young kids and I was on the ground playing with them all the time, I would do my stretches right then. I was sitting there playing blocks and playing Legos. I would do my stretches. Sometimes I'll suddenly remember at night and I'll get down on the floor when my family's watching TV and I'll be with them, but I'll do my stretches on the floor. There are ways to incorporate it at the playground. When you're going on a walk, you can stop and stretch for 5 minutes. You can do it when you're on a Zoom call. If you're allowed to turn off the video, no one will see you. It really does kind of have to become a part of your habit and your daily routine. Remember, get up every hour. If you are sitting at a desk right now, get up if you can, do some stretches, walk to the bathroom, do some stretches while you're there. I do it all of those times. You don't have to have 10 minutes on the ground to get the benefits of moving your body. The more you start to include movement as a part of your daily routine, the more your body will crave it and the more it will remind you that it's time to stretch. So I hope that helps give you some actionable tips to take to be able to start right away incorporating some stretching and some mobility into your own life. Remember, even a little bit of movement is better than no movement. Give yourself grace and patience along the way, and we are all in this together. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for joining me today on Meet Your Body. If you have a moment, please consider rating and reviewing this podcast as it helps us tremendously. For more resources and workouts, you can visit my website, jessicavalantpilates.com, or find me on YouTube or Instagram at Jessica Valant Pilates.